There we go, and start, continue. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us tonight for the webinar again, where Dr. Martin Sedgley will be talking about high-grade academic writing with a special focus on critical analysis. As a student myself, I always found Martin's webinars very, very useful, and I know that today's webinar is going to actually provide you some really quick wins on how to help you with this with your assignments. Martin is also going to, towards the end of the webinar, tell us a little bit more about the next week assignment, which is going to tell you a little bit more about how to pass your exams, time manage, and how to do your reflection before going into exams. But without further ado, Martin, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tatiana, and hello everyone. Thank you for joining tonight and giving up some time. I know that you'll be having to spend a lot of time on your computers nowadays with all the studies and doing so much more remotely. So I appreciate, you know, we've got a good number already I can see have attended, so I hope we'll make this as interesting as possible for you to give you some more direction really with this idea of how to develop critical analysis in your assignments. So some of you may have attended the last week's webinar, which we ran at the kind of first stage of academic writing, as I called it, and this is a kind of follow-up to that, going into more depth and exploration about what do tutors mean exactly by critical analysis, at least in many of the university disciplines that you may be studying, and how can you incorporate that in your academic writing for your assignments. So you can see that we're about halfway through now the webinar series that Unite has launched nationally now after a successful pilot of these before Easter. So I'm delighted to be working with them on this program, and let's show you. So really this is I think perhaps the most significant issue for high grades in assignments, and that tutors are unlikely to push your marks up into the sort of good honours level at undergraduate, as we call it, you know, 60s and 70s%, 2-1 first sort of level. You're going to have a good level, a good degree of critical analysis in your assignments to be qualifying for that, and similarly, if not even more importantly, at master's level up in the merits and distinction grades. This is really the threshold, I think, that you know, it's been often called in the past a threshold concept, critical analysis. That's a kind of academic idea of something that you don't know at first. You know, a threshold concept could be in any kind of discipline. Something that you don't know, but you have to learn how to do to be able to cross that threshold, in this case, to a greater degree of knowledge and understanding of academic writing, such that it'll enable you to achieve these higher grades. So I'm taking a very pragmatic approach really tonight about how to develop convincing arguments so that you can achieve high grades. And everything is set in the context of your assignments. So, and actually I should say as well for your exams, when you're writing scripts for exams too, but we'll kind of keep the immediate focus as assignments, but very often your exam answers, you could say, are like mini assignments anyway, aren't they? So it's applicable to both. And obviously for those, you're using academic sources. So we're always talking throughout tonight's session, whenever we talk about refer to the research and considering ideas and authors' views critically, we're always talking about the kind of academic sources that you'll be consulting, like textbooks and especially journal articles in your particular disciplines, maybe other things like government reports and so on that are relevant to a particular topic you might be looking at. Okay, so that's the kind of context to it. Let's start considering what might be meant by critical analysis, and that's the first big question, really, isn't it? That tutors will quite easily throw out this idea of critical analysis. I'm sure you hear it mentioned plenty of times. You may have got feedback in your assignments from the first semester, possibly, whether we're saying, this is too descriptive, it's not analytical enough, you should be going into more depth, these kind of comments. But what does that actually look like? What are the constituents of critical analysis in your assignments, certainly across most university disciplines that you might be studying in? So when I was working at a university, which I was doing until recently for the last 12, 15 years or so, so I worked closely with a range of academics across a number of disciplines, and I explored this with them, and I created this list as, from my experience of learning development and helping students with their assignments, this seemed to me to be a range of different functions that you might say, or purposes, that academic writing could contain depending on the particular assignment. So I composed this list of 11 factors or features of academic writing, and I sent it round to academic tutors in that faculty, and I said, will you rank these? Will you put them in order of importance of what you're looking for in students' assignments in terms of critical analysis? And then I aggregated the responses I got, and I created a list of the most important. So first of all, before I show you that, I wanted you, as you've probably been doing, to have a read through these. And I'm going to pause for a moment or two and ask you to, if you had to select, let's say, the 3 most important of those criteria that you think most closely constitute critical analysis in your discipline as you understand it so far, what would those top 3 be? I'm not going to ask you to put this into the chat box or anything yet, but I just want to give you a pause for thought really there for a moment. And so you'll see, actually, I will come back to this idea later of you putting your thoughts into this webinar as well. I mean, you'll see we have a Q&A icon at the top of the screen, you can see, and you'll notice that if you click on that, and Tatiana has also noted as well, that we'll really welcome your questions as we go through this. So I enjoy these much more, and I think they're much more valuable for you if we're getting some interaction going, and you can put your questions in literally as they occur to you as we go through. Tatiana will interrupt me if I'm in full flow, which is
I'm about to interrupt you because we have a question from Janet. Right. And Janet has asked the question. She said, hello, my question is about the second point about expressing your opinion. The tutors usually say we can't write in a first person. It's usually third person language. So how can we express our opinions in third person?
Well, Janet, thank you for that ideal question that I think lies right at the heart of so much of what we're going to talk about tonight. So in typical tutor fashion, I'm going to partly kind of park that and not fully address it directly, but please don't think that I'm ignoring that. That's really underlines so much of what we're going to be talking about. So certainly before I answer it, let's move on and have a look at what tutors said were the most important factors in this list, and then I'll pick up on that point again about where does expressing your own opinion come into this, as she says, the second one down in the list. Okay, let's move on, I hope. Yeah, here we are. So Actually, I gathered the first 5 for a start. That got the most responses. You'll understand it was a sort of simple kind of frequency collation that I did on the responses I got from tutors across a number of different subject areas. So these were the most commonly cited. I mean, there was quite a variety of opinion. So that's what interested me first of all, I would say, before we really consider this list in more detail, is that tutors, even within similar subject areas, similar disciplines anyway, had somewhat different views about at least the ranking priority of these different factors. So I had to kind of aggregate and see which ones came out most frequently. But I want you to notice that, first of all, that there isn't an absolutely unanimous agreement by any means amongst probably the tutors just within your own one faculty necessarily about what really is meant by critical analysis that they're looking for from students. But I hope by the end of this session we'll have reached a fairly good appreciation of what the most important features are that you should be aiming to integrate into your writing, and these were the ones that they suggested. So I think the first one is something that underlies tutors' expectations about everything you're doing at university, really, and that's that they want you to be critically evaluate, sometimes you might say critically analyse, by having a questioning attitude to anything that you read and hear. So in other words, not accepting at face value. And critical thinking has become a very popular discussion topic, hasn't it? I think in more recent times, because of the advent of so much social media, which is really kind of uncontrolled, let's say, as we know, and highly controversial in some ways. And so many different internet media around as well, replacing the more sort of traditional news media that was around 20 or 30 years ago. So there's so many different views coming in about anything from pretty well anybody, really, and there's very little vetting or censoring or sort of checking of facts and views and opinions and so on. So I think it's much more challenging for younger people now than it used to be to know what's the truth. Of course, the truth is a highly elusive kind of concept anyway, very slippery. But tutors at least are saying, well, in academia, one of the things we try and do really seriously is not take things at face value and be taken in easily and just believe everything we hear, but actually step back and think, does this make sense? Is this right? Well, how do I know this is convincing? And interestingly, in effect, they're saying that you should even apply that principle to their own lectures, aren't they, if you take that literally? And I think we should take it literally. I think that's something that's different in UK education, for example, from at least some other international educational cultures, perhaps which some of you will have come from in the last year or two, maybe. Plenty of other parts of the world, there's a much more what we call didactic way of teaching that expects students to read one textbook and kind of regurgitate a lot of that in an exam, pretty much word for word almost, you might say, and certainly to take the tutor as the authority on this subject, the guiding voice. And actually tutors, if they're really walking their talk, if they're practicing what they preach, then they should be recognizing that they're open to challenge as much as anything else that you might be studying, their lecture materials and so on. What that takes us into really is that you need to be exploring, and I'd say this is perhaps one of the major strands of tonight's discussion, you need to be considering, therefore, a range of different ideas on the same topic. And you can see the other 4 points are all really about that idea, that theme. So you're looking into other authors' ideas, and remember, in this case, we're talking always about academically credible sources. I'm not going to get sort of drawn down into a, an exploration of all these other less reliable sources that we might be open to in our lives, but let's just keep it in the academic context. So textbooks, journal articles, official reports from other institutions, these kind of things. You'll understand what I'm talking about, that you're already using in your assignments. So somehow you have to take ideas from quite a range of different sources, maybe 10 to 20 different sources for a 2,000-word essay we've discussed in the past webinars. Some of you who've attended those might remember. You've got to paraphrase those ideas into your own words, compare and contrast them. So you're exploring the debate around the topic. And we would say in the vast majority of academic disciplines, even the more scientific, hard, seemingly fact-based kind of subjects, there's still, research is continuously developing the knowledge in any of these areas. So there's always some kind of back and forth going on between different authors and the latest research findings. Tutors then observed that in some cases, some assignments, and I think quite often, they'll be expecting you to also further illustrate your understanding by applying the theoretical ideas, frameworks, models, theories, concepts that you're reading about in your textbooks and journal articles to case studies that you read about, or other real life situations you might even be personally have experience of. And so, that idea of application being the sort of final point to that. Okay, so, that gives us a sense of where we're going. And those of you who attended last week's first stage session on academic writing will recognise probably numbers 2, 3, 4, 5 as being things that we've already looked at a little bit, and we're going to consider these more carefully tonight as well. Okay. So really what we're saying is that any piece of academic research, a journal article, a report of some kind, is important, and it's making a contribution because it will have been, if it's in a journal, it will have been really rigorously reviewed by the editors and reviewers of that journal before it's even allowed to be published. Sometimes that process can take your tutors, academics who are publishing their research, might take them 2 years from conception of the research to actually seeing it in print in a journal article. So it's a really carefully evaluated process, but it's not the whole picture. It's never the whole picture. Anything that you read as one source text is only one small part of a much bigger puzzle or picture, let's call it. You'll understand the jigsaw metaphor that I'm using there. So a cornerstone of critical analysis is that you need to be looking for other research that addresses this topic, but considers it in a different way, or maybe in a different context. That research has been done in the States, and now another paper's looking at that in a quite different emerging economy in Southeast Asia. It could be anything really, but it's putting a different side to that same story in a way. I didn't mention at the beginning that partly what we're doing through these webinars is giving you a chance to listen to, as we call it, highly successful students. So over the last few weeks, I've been interviewing recent graduates from the last few years, and who all achieved really top class degrees. And I'm going to play you from time to time short clips of videos from those interviews, and here's the first one of those, with Farah, who got first class honours and then a distinction at MSc level. But I in the start of these webinars, like where we're at now, I always like to play some clips from very successful students talking about the struggles that they experience first before we hear about their strategies, because I'd like you to understand that struggling with these concepts, especially critical analysis, is part of the process of learning development as a university student. Okay, so
that's really important. What I used to do
Okay, so that was kind of endorsing what I've just been saying, wasn't it, really? Just to bring that to mind. And then, so in line with that view, what I've done so far, if you think about it, is I've showed you one study, haven't I? One piece of research about what's meant by critical analysis. In this case, my own study, as I've reported to you, at a UK university. So if we've got to consider some other views, let me show you a couple now then. So here's one from an American context. And then here's another one from a lady called Stella Cottrell, who you may well have seen one of her textbooks you might be using for on study skills and critical analysis. She's probably the best known author of study skills textbook. She's been around a long time and publishes through Macmillan, the same publisher as I've published my textbook through. So, you know, pretty strong authority, you might say. And here's just a little extract from her textbook, actually, on critical thinking skills, she calls it. So I want, if you think about this, okay, you've got three different ideas now, if you can remember some of what I showed you from my research and then these two. So already you can be, if you are critically evaluating this, you would be thinking about how are these agreeing with what Martin's just told me about his research? Are they saying the same thing, or are they saying something, are they mostly saying the same thing but then adding something extra? Are they contradicting something he said? Are they challenging that in a way through their own research findings as they're putting them here? So I'm going to let you just think about that for a minute while we do. I'll take a pause here anyway and just see if there are any questions before I give you a chance to listen to another student giving her view on the subject.
Thanks, Martin. We do have one question, but before we move on to the next question, just in response to Janet, I think I think it's a brilliant question, and as a postgraduate student myself, one of the problem things that, in order to summarize it, once you have covered your main research of the topic and you've looked at all of your literature, and you're probably looking at, I don't know, 10 to, as you mentioned, 10 to 20 references, depending on your word count and everything else. Is it safe to say then that the tutors would normally accept something like, so to summarize, or whilst there are various views on this specific topic, we can assume, and I think what Janet was asking is, I said she's not allowed to use personal opinion, so she has to write in a third person language. Yeah. So would that kind of cover it? So to summarize, while there are various views on whatever the topic is, we can assume, and I think that kind of sets your sentence up where you can then potentially finish with your own view?
Yes, yeah. Thanks for reminding me, Tatiana, because I had kind of moved on, hadn't I? I'd meant to stop, pause about that. So let's pick that up as you kindly suggested. So yeah, Janet, what I meant to say when I showed that list and then what the tutors came up with as their top 5 or 7 things was, the point that was least voted on, as you might say, so that came lowest on the list, was expressing your own opinion. So that's the kind of bald answer to your question, but that's not necessarily very helpful in itself, is it? Because I can almost guarantee you, in every workshop or webinar that I've run on critical analysis, which is many over the last few years in the UK and in other countries with foreign students as well, Everybody, you know, they all ask this question, you know, where's my own opinion? How can I write, as you say, if I'm not allowed to use the first person, and then they're saying I can't, you know, first person, just make sure everybody understands, would be right, something like I believe that, or I think this is, you know, or we can see that. And instead they're saying you've got to use the third person and you're not to express your own opinion. It sounds highly constraining, doesn't it? And I think students are often saying, you know, quite sometimes with quite a grievance really, or a strong sense of frustration, understandably. Well, where is my, you know, where am I in this assignment then? And I hope that you'll see by the end of the session that, but to kind of sort of headline this at the moment, and then we'll open it up much more as we go through the next few slides. But what I'm intending to show you, and I hope you can recognise, is that the argument we'll see is that your voice, as it's often referred to as, you know, the student voice. Where is the student voice in this? And Tatiana's given an indication of that, of where you kind of put a summary or an interpretation at the end of a particular bit of writing, quite often at the end of a single paragraph, certainly towards the end of the essay in more length. But we're going to look at some examples. But actually, we would say that the way that you do those first four stages of summarising and paraphrasing and synthesising those sources and discussing the debate, the way that you go about doing that will really, we can say absolutely, surely it will be unique to you. So the particular sources that you select, the ideas that you select from those sources, because you can only take a few quite specific points from any given source, because you've got such a short word count in your essay. The way that you turn that into your words to demonstrate your understanding, the way that you choose to recognise, or your ability to recognise how some authors are then agreeing with each other, broadly speaking, like I hope you could see, you know, the three ideas about critical analysis I've shown you so far, as I'll sum up in the next one or two slides. You know, I would say we're all pretty much on the same page there. You know, we're saying very similar things. So that's one side of the story, at least, where can you see and argue how authors are agreeing with one another. But then you'll bring in other authors that you recognise are challenging those views in some way, open up the debate. You know, all of those are academic steps in your academic writing that require skill, show your intelligence and understanding, and all of that accumulates into a literally unique essay. Unique is a word that's used far too flippantly, you know, far too easily. But in this case, literally, you can say your essay will be unique from any other student's essay because of all of those factors. And that's where your voice is coming through. So the tutors are saying the reason you're at university is to learn and broaden your understanding and gain a lot more knowledge about a breadth of, you know, a whole range of different ideas and views and research that from people who've spent a lot more time looking into this than you've had enough years to do even yet in your life. So, you know, we're distilling all of this and conveying it to you through these different sources and lectures and so on, so that you can expand your knowledge. Then show us what you've learned about that over the course of this module, over the course of this academic year, or years even. And that's where your voice emerges. Yeah.
So I've Janet, I've actually typed up some of this stuff in the direct response where the question was actually asked. We have actually Esti who's asked the next question, following from Janet, from what Janet said earlier. In previous essays, when I've expressed an opinion, I've been told it's descriptive. I study nursing.
Okay, yes, thanks, that's useful to know.
And then we have two more questions after that, okay?
Okay, great, this is great. Thank you very much, everyone, for engaging so actively, so quickly. That's lovely. Yeah, I'm just bringing this up on my screen so I can remind myself. Let me just bring that, scroll that down. Oh, yeah, I think I've gone past it now. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I can't see that. Can you just remind me of that question? I'm sorry, I'm not.
Time, yeah. So in previous essays where I've expressed an opinion, I've been told it's too descriptive. And the problem with ST is she studied nursing.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, ST, thanks. Yeah, I mean, this is a major distinction, isn't it, that tutors make between writing that stays down in the lower grades, descriptive, and writing, as I indicated at the beginning, moves you up into the higher grades, is a lot to do with critical analysis. Now, you know, by the end of the session tonight, hopefully you'll have a better sense of what critical analysis is in itself, but to kind of open up that difference as clearly as we can, just quickly. A sort of shortcut way I sometimes suggest to students of thinking about this is that you can say description tends to address what questions. So what is this theory saying? You know, what are the dimensions in this framework? I'm sorry, I won't find it very easy to think of a nursing example for you, because that's not the discipline I've come from at university, but you'll probably be able to make those connections yourself, hopefully. And sometimes, yeah, maybe they'll be about what is going on in that situation, you know. So I guess you'll have quite a lot of applied studies on your courses where you're looking at situations that are happening, you know, medical situations and scenarios, and you might be at, you know, so part of your essay may be about briefly, and that's the key word for description, briefly describing, you know, stating what is happening here, and then briefly perhaps stating what is you know, a recommended course of action prescribed, you know, suggested by the latest model on dealing with this kind of medical situation. Now, where you move into analysis is when you start asking how and why questions, especially why. So why would that approach be better than another approach? How would you employ that in that situation? You know, the steps that you would follow, and why you would take those steps, and why that follows another step before, and that sort of thing. I mean, I'm struggling a bit to conceptualize this in a nursing context, but that's just one way of thinking about it that I think students can find helpful, is thinking, okay, at the beginning of the essay, I've probably got to, you know, if I'm asked to talk about a theory of motivation, something like that comes easier to mind for me, then I've probably got to show a figure or briefly describe what the two key points are in this theoretical idea, you know, that certain people are a type A and certain people are a type B, and they are motivated in different ways, the theory states. But how does that actually turn into action in the workplace, and why is that harder to control from one group than it is to manage another group of people? So it's those how and why questions that are important, I think. So that's a little bit of an indication, and we'll hopefully kind of think about that as we go through as well. I'm just reading the other questions, actually. Thanks, Tasha. Yeah, you might want to talk about the PowerPoint and the recordings. I see somebody was asking about that.
I have actually answered that. So yes, recording the session will be available on United Students YouTube channel. And also, guys, for all of you, I would strongly suggest you get in touch with Martin following the webinar. And his email will be displayed. I think it's on one of the last slides, and he will be able to offer further support as and when required. We have a couple other questions, actually, and then another question came back from Janet. But let's go with the next one. So also with expressing your opinion, I get confused because I thought academic work needs to be highly referenced from academic sources. And so if I express my opinion, there won't be academic, would it? And yes. I think this is where you've mentioned it. When you do have opposing opinions, you can kind of summarize it, therefore, and take it from that angle.
Right. Yeah. We'll look at, I've got a paragraph on a slide of student writing which shows this, you know, just within one paragraph, of moving from a brief summary of other academic sources' ideas, and then how would you interpret that as kind of indicating to the tutor that that's coming from your understanding. This is a tricky skill requiring quite a subtle use of the English language, as Tatiana gave an example of, you know, saying things like, so this suggests that. That's third person, isn't it? You know, to come back to Janet's question again, rather than saying, I believe this means that. It's a bit of a game, really, in a way, because in effect you are saying to the tutor, you know, this is my view, but it is based on interpreting what you've already written. So the question that's just come in there that Tatiana read, yeah, absolutely, I'd agree with that, and I think you can see that that confirms really what we've just been saying. Yeah, okay. The next question, I think, about being too descriptive, hopefully I've kind of at least partly covered that just now, because I'd like to move on, I think, Tatiana, if we can, to listen to another student. Shall we do that now? Is that okay? Yeah.
Let's go. We have just a couple of more comments from Janet. So I agree with Esti. I also study nursing, and I've been told several times that opinions are not needed. I should analyze the researches and I've read rather than give what I think. In terms of descriptions, my tutor said to analyze like advantages and disadvantages of the issue, how it directly helps the issue, critiquing or agreeing with the research are used as opposed to describing. Explain the point I've made, and then she said, thank you. This is again, Janet, exactly what I've mentioned. You need the opposing opinions, exactly what Martin said, but once when you get that opposing opinion, close the loop by saying, therefore, this suggests that, and then you take it, and through that channel, you can still voice what you are and what you've learned by doing the research, and I kind of hope that that helps.
Yeah. I'll just pick up on a point in Janet's response there as well, Tatiana. I think I just also endorse what your tutors mentioned there, Janet, about, you know, analysis comes in when you start considering, for example, the advantages or disadvantages of a particular particular way of dealing with a medical emergency or something. Well, you know, your kind of situation. Many assignment questions, particularly in many disciplines, they're looking at that kind of thing, you know, weighing up. That's evaluating, isn't it? We can understand that quite easily. The pros and cons, you know, the advantages of this and the disadvantages of doing that, or maybe two different ways of going at it, which one's better and why. Always coming back to that. So every time you use the word because or for the reason that, then you're also automatically moving into analysis, because you're having to explain why something is better than something else, or why this is working in this way now, or why this is a problem and how it could be solved. Why and how, you know, we keep coming back to those for analysis. Okay, anything else, Tatiana, or are we okay to move on? Or? No. I've lost your voice, Tatiana.
Yes, we are good to go. Esti, also following Janet said earlier, in previous essays where I've expressed an opinion, I've been told it's descriptive. She studies obviously nursing, and then she said, thank you. That answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. Because I can ramble on sometimes and lose the plot, so you'll have to keep me in check there. Right, let's listen to another graduate. Called Anwar, international student. Again, you see, did very well in her master's degree when she came and studied for that at the UK. Let's just hear what she might add to this discussion.
Martin, I think her voice has gone.
Oh, right.
It's very crackly.
Oh, sorry, let me go back. Can you not hear it at all, Tatiana? Or?
It just crackles, so I'm not sure.
Really? Oh, I wonder what's happened with that. Sorry, I think we'll skip it. So it doesn't sound like it's, yeah, it is playing an audio then, but not well. Sorry, I don't know why that's happened, everyone, but just to sum up what Anwar was saying towards the end, that leads us into the next slide as kind of new stage of the webinar. She was commenting, as well as saying, you know, researching lots of different sources and bringing them together. It's like the next challenge is, how do I integrate these different sources together, their different views? You know, what's the structure that I should adopt in an assignment, or indeed in an exam script, to a certain extent at least? How do I put these together in a way that creates a logical, convincing argument? So I'd like to use another metaphor in a way here about this, about how you have got a sort of whole set of different collection of different ideas, haven't you, at some point from your research, and you've got to try and put them together in a way that creates something clearly conveys to the tutor your understanding and what you've arrived at as your kind of belief, your best belief now from all that research about this topic. So I'm going to use the metaphor of like paragraphs in your writing being like the rooms in a house. And so we have a room here, don't we? And if I said to you, what's this room? You know, which kind of room is this? I think you would know straight away that this is a dining room. And that really points to the first feature of a well-constructed paragraph, using what we've called the T framework here. This is probably this might be a familiar idea to you from, it may have been called something slightly different, but you'll understand, I think, the basic concept of this is that you have one sentence in the paragraph that captures what the whole paragraph is about, and it's about one topic. So that's the first thing I want you to do is understand that when you're in a dining room, you don't want it to be a bedroom and a hallway and a bathroom as well, do you? That could be really awkward at times. So, you know, it's got to have a function, and the function of one paragraph should be to convey one topic in some depth. So, you know, there's a lot of different features to this dining room, or quite a number anyway, that go up to make it an attractive, interesting space, let's say. So you have one idea. It's usually the first sentence in the paragraph is the topic sentence, and then further sentences in that paragraph go on to explain the idea in some way that the tutor can see you are relating ideas from other people. So the next point is evidence. You know, it's ideas or explanations that are coming from other authors' research, as we've thoroughly established by now, I'm sure you agree, and how you're interpreting those ideas, relating them to your essay question. You know, their research was done in quite a different context. They weren't doing their research to answer your essay question, but you can come in as an intermediary moderator of those different pieces of research and tailor them, you know, customize them, relate them to your essay question. So there's got to be lots of citations in most paragraphs. In most subjects, I would expect multiple citations, you know, at least 2 or 3 to different sources. This can't, I'm sorry, you know, I'm probably banging on about this ad nauseum for you now, and you think we've heard this before, you know, just move on, but I've got to keep saying it, I think, because that's one of the key reasons that tutors drop their marks. And as we said, possibly, you know, quite probably actually, plenty of your paragraphs might then even better show your understanding because you explain it in the context of a real world situation, you know, a nursing situation in a hospital ward, for example, as with the students we've just been hearing from. So what does that look like? You know, this is kind of abstract, isn't it? We're just talking up in the air. So what does that actually translate into being in a paragraph? Well, okay, I'm continuing this idea that I developed earlier on from 3 different authors, myself included, on what is meant by critical analysis. And I believe this is, you know, at least a reasonable version of a T framework paragraph. And by that I mean that you have a topic sentence, and it is the first sentence in this case. It doesn't have to be, but often is. So I think as we've just said, critical analysis, a big part of that is about researching widely around a topic to reach a conclusion based on the weight of argument from different research, from different points of view. And then I think, so then we've got an evidenced example, so that my study, you would say, was an empirical study, because I said, I conducted a study with a little survey that produced results, data back from university tutors, and that seemed to come to that conclusion as well. And then we looked at another, authority, well-respected authority in the field, from a textbook that she'd written, which also supported that. Can you see in each case, everyone is evidenced? So by that we mean there's a citation, it's come from a credible academic source. At the end of your essay, you would include those three, the fuller references for those three citations, as you'll understand, I expect. So there we are, that's there we are. I could say, well, you understand now what critical analysis is about. I've given you 3 pieces of evidence, but if we are being truly critically analytical, would we say that's enough then? So would you be convinced by that? Another way of saying that is, so this is what I've just listed, that I got from before, that seem to be pretty much kind of being referred to in a similar way by the other pieces of research. So is that your definitive list? If you do that every time, is that okay for you to accept my research as the kind of guiding principle, the truth about what is critical analysis? Well, I'm sure you can recognise that I'm leading you towards trying to ask you to put into practice question 1, so point 1 here, which is, well, no, actually, you should be questioning, shouldn't you, my research? How would you do that? And that's the question I have for you, really, is I'd like you to now put into the question box, so as some of you have been feeding in comments through that and questions, what questions could you ask of my research that would, be a way of critically analysing my research? What questions could you ask to dig deeper into the truth, the credibility of my research? What questions could you ask? So will you put in, Tatiana will tell me, but I'll bring up my screen as well. What questions would you ask about something like that, this type of research? Let's see if we get any thought from anyone. No, nothing coming through.
No questions at the moment.
Okay. Right, so what I'm saying is that, okay, we've, I'm saying, okay, I've done what I needed to do, haven't I? I've found some other views, I've incorporated them, I've related them to my view, but what's the problem with that? What's, well, okay, I won't dwell too long just because of time, but I expect at least you're having a think about this. So let's recognise that you could say, well, why was I doing this research? If you're writing an assignment on something, that's a useful question to ask when you're reading a piece of research. You sort of think, well, was it for the similar purpose to what I'm trying to use my assignment to explain? And in this case, I would say, well, the purpose of my webinar tonight is to try and help you understand what tutors are looking for in students' essays, and actually, in your essays, and actually that is the question that I put to the academic tutors to create this research. So that sounds okay, but then I think
that we do have, especially perhaps asking how the research relates to the discipline.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So yes, I mean that's kind of picking up on the first point, isn't it? About, you know, what was the research about? Okay, how does it relate to the? Yeah, I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it. And then some.
We also have opposing views, application, analysis of resources.
Yeah. So, you know, I've told you, it's so easy, isn't it, for you to sit there and think, well, this guy, you know, Unite students are saying this is a really good guy. Tatiana's done a great job of promoting me at the beginning and saying that, you know, what I talk about is really useful. I worked for 15 years at university. I must know what I'm talking about, and therefore I've got a definitive view on critical analysis. But actually, the research study that I showed you was based on a collation of 10 responses from a original sample of 60 lecturers within one discipline. So it's only one. Can I remind you of the jigsaw? It's just one piece of the puzzle. It's not invalid. It's not, you know, something you should just ignore. I think it has a real value. And another question you asked was, well, when was it done? And actually, it's already 8 or 9 years old. You know, it's a study I did when I was earlier in my career there. However, I can say, and you know, that it's not necessary that you'd be able to find this out otherwise, but I can say that I've actually kind of based this, and it seems to have been confirmed and reconfirmed that kind of picture of critical analysis through a lot more experience I've had of reviewing students' essays and talking to tutors about what they're looking for in them. So, you know, it has got a certain credibility in it. But, you know, we've had some questions from students in the nursing discipline already tonight, and, you know, some elements of this should be transferable. I would think many of the ideas we're talking about, and from what they're saying, it seems to correspond with what their tutors are saying. But you've got to keep partly open-minded, at least, haven't you? We don't have to say skeptical necessarily, but as somebody said, shouldn't you be looking for contrasting views? And yes, absolutely. I've given you one side of the story here because the three of us that I showed you, our views on critical analysis, we're all quite supportive of one another. So I've got one side of the story. Now I'm going to show you a slide, therefore, that moves beyond that into presenting, even still just within one paragraph, a bigger view of the wider debate, not on the same topic, but for those of you who were in a session last week, you might recognise this as it being about a topic I chose then was about inclusivity in organisations. So how well or not in practice are large organisations like the NHS, for example, actually respecting the value and contribution that can be made by people from all sorts of different backgrounds and situations. For example, people with disabilities is the one that's focused on here. So the topic sentence is actually showing where the tutor is coming down on this argument, because the question was, you know, inclusivity in the workplace, is it just rhetoric, or is it actually happening in practice? You know, is it just being paid lip service to? The student has come down on that first side of that debate in the topic sentence. We can see that, you know, saying that, you know, it's quite a bold statement. Large organisations aren't catering for people with disabilities and harnessing their potential, as is actually required by legislation. But they've got two supports for that, you know, so immediately we've got two sets of evidence from two different journal articles, as the tutor would then see from the references if she went to look at that. Picking up then on Williams and others' article in the second sentence, they give an example. Some of you may remember, if you were with us last week, about an experienced team leader who had the beginnings of dementia diagnosis and was then kind of marginalised, really, excluded from a lot of the responsibilities you had before. You know, ironically, in the NHS, you know, as the nurses will understand, should be, you would have hoped, would have received a much more inclusive treatment by the management of that NHS trust, but apparently weren't. So, and then we've got further support again from the first set of authors saying this is a wider problem, you know, from their research, at least with people with dementia, for example, that this is happening in a lot of different organisations. So there's clearly a lot more room for development of guidance and support to be adopted by management in these kind of organisations. Now, though, we get this lovely word conversely, or it could be however, of course, and it's a great signal to the tutor that even still within the same paragraph, and I quite like that they're showing two sides like close together, you know, within one set of writing. Another survey by a different set of authors at least reports that some companies, you know, some more positive case studies, and that both sides of that story, that people are recognising the value as well as the employers. Now, then we get this kind of phraseology that Tatiana was referring to. Something like this suggests, so third person, neutral, you know, it could therefore be seen that, you know, or this could mean that, you know, these kind of neutral third person objective ways of writing. As I say, you could argue it's a bit of a game really, but that is a signal to the tutor that first of all, because of that phraseology, and secondly, because it's the first sentence in this whole paragraph which does not have a citation at the end of it. So the tutor gets it, you know, quickly, that this is you coming in and saying, so what I've made of even this short section of writing is there are two sides of the story. There's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of evidence saying this isn't happening as well as it should be. The inclusivity is still a bit of a token gesture thing going on even in bigger organisations like the NHS. But there's an opportunity here, isn't there, to actually gain the contributions and harness those from people with disabilities, and that's about overcoming management prejudices, barriers, perceptions about those. So I'm saying that's where your student interpretation is coming in. So this is only a little microcosm, of course, but you might only have something like, in a 2,000 word essay, 8 of these paragraphs, as well as an introduction and conclusion. So you've got to make every paragraph really work for you. They're giving you limited word counts, even if it's 3,000, you know, it's still the same principle. There's got to be a new development in every sentence and showing the debate, the advantages, disadvantages, pros and cons, two different sides, you know, is it happening, is it not happening, why is that, why would it be better if it was happening? All of these kind of questions we've talked about already. Let's listen to another student talking about his, sorry, two students actually talking about their understanding of this. I hope we'll get some sound, Tatiana, just let me know if it's happening. I'm going to open this up actually to full screen. Maybe that will be better. I don't know. I'll just try that in case that makes a difference at this end. I don't know why.
No, unfortunately, no sound coming out.
Okay, I think because I really would like the students to hear this, I'm going to do what we've done before and just come out all together.
Okay. In the meanwhile, guys, what I've done is, as Martin was taking us through the last sentence example, I've actually typed up in your Q&A session the framework, which is kind of expanded and some of the things that you it will help you when you're formulating your sentences, what you could use as a good starting point, how the paragraph should actually look like. So, you know, take screenshots of your phone, or and hopefully this will actually support you with your academic writing. In the meanwhile, we have another comment which said, so another way of being critical can be using wording like, from the above, it can be implied that. And I think that, Martin, exactly what you said.
Yeah, that's another. I mean, there are lots of variations on that theme, and that's another good example of moving away from, well, of not using first person, moving into third person. And as if you were in last week's session, you remember one of the 4 key principles of academic writing style that I talked about was to be cautious, tentative, you know, careful. Not using absolute terms like always or never, or this must mean that, or this proves that, but using expressions rather, in most disciplines at least, things like, you know, this could imply that, yeah, you know, as the student is saying. Absolutely, yeah. Let me just launch this again, Tatiana, and we'll try it once more and hope it works. If not, we'll move on. Just let me know if you can hear this okay.
Through an example, normally you write, for example, an essay, and you always integrate your own opinion, or you write from your own opinion.
Some people always forgot the dark side of something, but it's quite important. Or even some classes.
I've got to interrupt there because I forgot to say before we started that this is Anxi from China, who's done really well on all her studies, now doing a PhD actually for Nottingham University in China. But you might not pick up what she's saying. There's a dark side. So it's like the Star Wars version of critical analysis. So she means like there's always the other side of the story, you know. But she used this delightful expression of the dark side.
Class series also have the dark side. This cannot find in books, but can find in some papers. So read more.
Take all the information that was provided online and offline, and then look what aligns with your opinion, and then write an article with the pros and the cons, and then getting back to the pros again, which are very often in line with your opinion, and then write a conclusion based on that. Through an example.
Yeah, so actually I'll just go back. I just wanted to make a point here that Jack's interestingly brought up this idea of you're looking for ideas that fit with your opinion. So that's really kind of a different angle on what we've been discussing a lot, isn't it? Because I've kept saying, and you know, we've been broadly agreeing, haven't we, in our discussions, that you shouldn't express your own opinion. That's not what tutors are looking for. But interestingly, I have heard plenty of successful students like Jack got a distinction in his MSc when he came to the UK, international student. I remember another student running a workshop with me when I was at the university and saying what he decided on the position he had on this argument from the beginning, and then he went out and got his research to look for support for that side of it, but knowing that he had to find some contrary views as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you won't have an opinion. I think it's quite likely that, you know, you're not likely to be, it's unlikely you'll be starting with what they call a tabula rasa, you know, a blank slate at the beginning. Your mind is not like that, partly because you've been studying this subject, haven't you, for at least one semester, one academic term, and you've read the textbook and some journal articles perhaps, or at least let's say the lecturer's slides you've followed, that's important, and maybe a section of the relevant chapter in the core textbook. You should have what we referred to last week as like a core understanding, a basic understanding of the topic quite early on in your research, before you probably start writing at all. So you are starting from you're somewhere up in that debate yourself, in a position for or against, as we might say. So Jack's of the view, you know, that he's got an idea of where he wants to go with this before he starts, but he knows he has to find the evidence on either side and somehow present a more convincing argument for the side he wanted. But I think at the same time, if we're saying you're being truly critically analytical, we say you've got to be open-minded enough to be willing to have your mind change, possibly through the research. I mean, that's what's so potentially fascinating about everything you're doing, isn't it? That you might learn to come to a different view. I think life is like that, isn't it? We would be silly to suggest that, you know, we know where we are, we know where we stand, and that's always going to be where we'll be for the rest of our lives. That's too rigid, isn't it? We need to be open to new persuasion, really, but to make sure that's really credible. Right, let me see if I can just move on then. We've gone well on with time tonight, so thank you for staying with us. Just kind of put this in a wider context, really. This is a quote from another author of a textbook on critical thinking. I'll show you the references next. But she's really applying that, what we've been discussing about finding the different views, plurality of ideas, you know, multiple ideas. It's a cornerstone of democracy and science as well, and that you find the most convincing position based on the evidence and rationale that you read about.
And we had Nikki, who has just posted, so there is more space for tabula scriptum.
Oh, okay, yes, right. Yeah, yes, definitely. So, yes, I just want to move on, conscious of our time. So I hope you found this useful and interesting. There are further study guides on the ELS International website, you know, from my business. And, you know, I've published a textbook which does cover all of these skills within within one discipline or a range of disciplines comprising business and management studies. So quite a lot, as you'll have heard tonight, because that's where I'm coming from, and I think they apply quite well to many of the subjects that you might be studying. We've heard of nursing, for example, it's transferring over into that, isn't it? So some of you might find the ideas useful in that book, even for next year's studies if you're going on. The publisher offers a 25% discount if you use this code, but you can access all of that through the website along with the study guides. So they're shorter booklets giving a sort of simple range of ideas, developing some of the things we've looked at tonight with longer examples of writing and tutors' commentary on sample essays and things like that. And I provide feedback on assignments as well. I know you'll be working on these at the moment, so if you have time and you would like to get this kind of detailed feedback on pretty well every paragraph of your writing, then that's possible. You can inquire by contacting me. You'll see contact forms on the website if you want to do that, or through this email address. And you'll have a department in your university like learning development or assignment, academic skills advice, that sort of thing. And it's well worth inquiring with them what kind of support they offer to give feedback on assignments. It will vary quite a lot depending on the resources they have. So you've got lots of different options. Don't be afraid to ask for help, because we all need help with our writing. We get too caught up in it and can't see the wood for the trees sometimes. Okay, if you've enjoyed tonight and you want to recommend it to any of your friends, we're running it again tomorrow at 1 o'clock, so do pass on the word. And otherwise, same times next week. I'm going to look at, I'm very conscious that you may well have various assessments coming close together in the next few weeks, including exams. So we're going to look at a kind of combined time management, preparing for exams whilst you might still be working on assignments, sort of terrible pressure situation that you might well find yourself in, and a few tips about how successful graduates say you can look after yourself in the process and manage your stress in a way that you keep on top of things and you know, look after yourself as well during that. So thank you very much for attending, staying with it tonight. We've gone a bit over on time. I've really enjoyed it because we've had some great questions. I'm sure Tatiana has as well. And thank you all very much. And I'll pass back to her now.
Now, absolute brilliant session. Thank you very much, guys. Nikki, Janet, all of you, really, really good. We had quite a few thank yous. This is great. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, moderator. Recently received feedback from an assignment. It was deemed descriptive, so I'm happy about this session. Incredibly helpful, which is exactly what these are about, guys. Next week's session, I think it's going to be, Martin and I discussed it in length last week, trying to prepare for it. And we were discussing, it would be interesting while you're still online to find out about your exams. Actually, are they going to be face-to-face? Are you having open book exams? What are you? How are you managing the exams? So if you are still online, if you don't mind just putting into a chat box whether you have exams, and then if they are they online or are they face-to-face? If they're online, are they open book? So whether you can have book next to you when you're answering. I think because Martin will be able to prepare a little bit more and better for the next week's session. Let's see. I know that there is a slight delay on when we talk and what gets published.
This will be really helpful for us if you can just give us any information about, you know, when your exams are happening, what kind of form that's taking, because I'm very conscious that a lot of you may well be doing open book exams, you know, from your own home perhaps, which will affect how, you know, want to make things as practical as possible for you next week. So any thoughts? Really welcome. Yeah.
So we had few of them. I think the answers are just coming in, Martin. My exams are all assessments. I'm on a placement, so I tend to miss these seminars. I have one exam. It's online. It's
okay. That's quite a specific
exam. It's an open book.
Yeah.
Online. Another one we had all critical writing, so it's very involving in terms of research. Evaluate. So I think, yeah, we are definitely having more, at least these cohort of students who are currently online are having more with the assignments rather than.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then all of them are online. Those who have exams are all online. Brilliant, guys. This will be really useful, as I said, for Martin in order to prep for the next week. But I think it will help you answer some of the questions. How do you time manage your revisions in order how to pass your exams with confidence? So please do try to log in next week. So same time, Tuesday at 5:30 or Wednesday at 1 p.m. And we hope to see you all there.
I'll just add one final point, Tatiana, because some people are saying that, you know, it's a lot more about assignments, and I know many tutors have tried to move to that way of assessment because of all of the COVID restrictions. So just to say, I will, you know, relate what we discussed quite a lot to us, balancing all your priorities really. So if you're mostly still working on assignments, but maybe have 3 deadlines all coming together within the same 1 or 2 weeks, that could well be happening. Then I'm going to look at those kind of issues. You know, how do you manage your time? How do you prioritize? How much time you put into each thing, and keep yourself sane in the process is our main aim and approach we'll be taking. So that's very helpful. Thank you for that feedback.
We do have some other ones, as answers. There's online again, and then 3 exams online that are open book. Okay. So I think actually putting some information in your presentation, your webinar, Martin, for next week that does cover and give students some help of how to manage it, because people think that open book exams are easy peasy lemon squeezy. They're not. I think you can actually get bogged down very easily into the detail and completely miss it. You can quite easily find yourself, if you had 50 questions, you can answer 25, and then 25 will be completely missed. So yeah, brilliant, guys. Again, we hope to see you again next week. Have a wonderful weekend, the weekend, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.